What's the power of AI? Can it cut costs? Improve productivity? Help business be more efficient? Yes, yes, and yes. But what happens when you industrialize AI? You can transform the very nature of business itself. You connect platforms and data sources to unleash new insights. You power processes that learn and adapt, growing smarter and sharper with experience. You empower your people to master new skills, to help them do what they do better, and do what they never thought was possible. When AI becomes more than just AI, it's powerful enough to create new industry propositions that make businesses more profitable and people's experiences more personal. That's not just AI. That's applied intelligence.
Thank you, Professor Michael Alonso, for that introduction. We're happy to be here this afternoon at the Silicon Valley Conference. We are joined by three panelists who will be happy to take your questions afterward. You can connect with them through the conference discussion board. So please feel free to do so. They would enjoy hearing your questions. Again, thank you for joining us. And our subject for the day in this panel is the million-dollar question. I suppose it depends upon how much your company is worth, but it's a very important question in any case. How do you build an ethical AI-augmented organization that people want to work for? And as all of you are aware, we have seen a number of ethical flare-ups recently. I read just the other day that Palantir is thinking of leaving Silicon Valley, complaining of ethical intolerance in the Valley. We have seen employees increasingly becoming involved in the kinds of projects that their larger organization is undertaking, and sometimes objecting to those projects. For example, facial recognition can be troublesome for many for a number of reasons. And so the topic of employee interest in ethics is significant for companies today. And what we're hoping to discuss with our distinguished panelists is their view of how ethics exists in the AI world as far as they experience it, and how governance and similar kind of concerns can be organized to increase or to gain employees. This is a competitive world, and there is a high demand for qualified people. What can companies do to attract this talent? So, as I say, we have three panelists, and I thought that I would ask them to introduce themselves beyond their names, which I will provide. And I thought that we would ask them to introduce themselves in this way, by talking first a little bit about what their entrance is to AI. What are they doing? For each of you, what are they doing here? How do they get involved in this business? And what does the ethical terrain look like for them? What kinds of values do they see as being important in the world today for those working in artificial intelligence? So I thought we could perhaps start with Merve Hickok. Welcome, Merve. How do things look from your angle?
Thanks, James, and glad to be here. Honored to be here with the other panelists. So I'm the founder of AIethicist.org. I have about 20 years of experience in multinationals and senior global roles. And my focus was HR, recruitment technology, and HR technology and diversity across multiple countries. So that work allowed me to see how changes you make in technology and your company's policies can create extra obstacles in certain cases for certain populations when they're trying to access resources or different opportunities. In addition to my AI and ethics work, I also work for a nonprofit that develops and delivers learning systems and technology for people with disabilities. So on a daily basis, I'm seeing how design and technology, and for me in particular AI, is impacting, making assumptions about abilities of people and impacting the lives of people on a very real level. So I started a while back, I started looking into researching AI ethics, bias, asking these questions about governance, etc. I work as an independent consultant and lecturer, trying to build capacity on AI and ethics for those looking for ethical and responsible practices in their work. And I'm also involved in a number of international organizations and projects that are currently trying to create different governance methods around the world. Unfortunately, when we have like anti-discrimination laws, we have some privacy laws, but none of the laws, at least in the US, GDPR was a start in EU, but none of the laws in the US have really caught up with the AI technologies. And there are not many governance methods out there that are solely focused on AI ethics right now. What you asked me about, values and how I define AI ethics, I was recently asked to describe that ethics in general in 5 words. It's kind of a challenge. And my answer was hear, respect, serve, and do right. So hearing about people's challenges and needs, respecting the lived experiences and perspectives in your work, serving for a cause that is bigger than you and bigger than me, and doing the right thing even when no one else is looking. At the end of the day, I want to be in a position where I can be proud to tell my children what I've done, and I am doing things that are not putting people's children in harm's way. And for me, that's a very basic thing, and I think it goes along with the ethical approach as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Merve. We also are joined by Salim Teja. What do you see?
Hi.
And where are you? What are you up to in this field?
Yeah, thanks, James. My name is Salim Teja, and I am a partner at Radical Ventures. We are a $350 million venture capital firm that focuses on investments in the AI space. So we would be looking at technologies like machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, and robotics, and its applications to industries like healthcare, financial services, infrastructure, which for us would mean smart city, smart mobility, and we're based in Toronto, Canada. I think we approach the topic of AI governance and AI ethics from the lens of an investor, and so I think first and foremost, it guides the way that we think about investment opportunities and where we choose to focus and where we choose to back certain types of companies and certain types of teams and in certain types of industries. Secondly, I think for the companies that we've invested in, it guides the way that they tell their narrative to both attract talent, which I think in our world continues to be a really important part of their strategy, as well as the way that they interact and engage with customers and get their technologies out to market. And so, the topic is, specifically in the startup world as it relates to AI, the topic of ethics and governance is very top of mind. I think we as an investor, when we look at all of the technologies that are out there, some of which are focused on industries like defense or public services. The ultimate objective of the particular technology or solution, can live in areas of grayness. And so we as an investor have always, chosen to look for investments that are making a positive impact to society and to industries. And we try and let that guide some of our decision making. But I hope through the course of this conversation, I can share my perspectives as an investor, some of the perspectives of our startups who are doing some of the breakthrough research in this world, as well as some of the feedback that they're giving us about the corporate customers that they're engaging with, the Fortune 500s, and some of the challenges that they are trying to navigate in the implementations of these technologies.
Terrific. So just very quickly, is your focus on investing in AI-intensive companies, or rather is it the use of AI to make better investment decisions? Or
no, it's to invest in AI-intensive companies, the companies that are developing the breakthrough hardware and software innovations that will ultimately create some innovative and interesting solutions for industries.
Terrific. So I'm actually also working in that area, and I'm trying to develop a kind of a structure for an ethical kind of structure for rating companies that are AI intensive in terms of their social or human impact. And it's something like, are you familiar with ESG investing?
Yep.
So it's something like that, but the categories of ESG investing were really made for the industrial world. It seems to me that artificial intelligence has a very different set of values. So we need a different set of categories for rating those companies. For example, ESG is environment, of course, is the governance. Well, environmental concerns are not as important for AI because they don't do strip mining and that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, privacy, which is terrifically important for artificial intelligence, is not very important for most industrial companies. So I sometimes recall the Model T, the Henry Ford. He said, look, you can have any color car you want as long as it's black, right? So for the industrial economy, things are very much about homogenization, whereas the AI economy is very much about personalization. So I think that leads, connecting with your work, that leads to a different way of having to think about what kinds of values qualify a company as a humanitarian, let's say, AI company. So we'll see where that leads. It sounds like very interesting work. Monark, what is your entrance to all of this discussion?
Fantastic. So first of all, James, thank you for having me on the panel, and I think it's a great honor. I think I +1 on what Merve said earlier. It's a great honor to actually share this wonderful panel with all of you. I am part of our applied intelligence practice at Accenture. So we come from a massive consulting company. We do everything for our customers, from upfront strategy to execution to running and operating their systems. We are built in data and AI. My entire career I've spent amongst data and AI. And very interestingly, when I started my career, we used to struggle to get data. We used to struggle to find data. Data availability was always an issue. Things in this one career span has changed so drastically that we now sit on tremendous amounts of data. We have some of the most sophisticated AI, machine learning, and data sciences techniques. And I strongly believe that, and I'm going to borrow a cliche here, but with great data comes great responsibility, right? You're now sitting on so much of data that it is so easy to start using it, misusing it, and abusing it. And to a large extent, our goal as a company, as an individual, has been to try and be at the forefront of making sure that does not happen. So when Accenture defines responsible AI or ethical use of AI, we base it on a framework which we call the trust framework. And it literally stands for being trustworthy, being reliable, making sure that what you create is understandable and teachable, but also secure, right? So I actually break this into 3 big buckets, and we'll touch upon some of these themes across this entire panel, right? But the first thing that I typically look for is the systems that we are creating having any bias, right? So bias and fairness are actually the first tenet and pillar of what we essentially do. The second pillar of what we essentially do is making sure that everything is understandable, explainable, and teachable, right? AI cannot be a black box, right? That is one of the biggest impediment to the adoption of AI. And the final thing is to make it secure and have agency. There's a classic trade-off between what we call the privacy and agency. And we'll touch upon that as well. But those are the three big tenets of how we've been approaching responsible AI.
Terrific. Right. It sounds like you're certainly in the mainstream there. I have a quick question for you. What do you say about this, to the question of explainability? I sometimes sort of fish around in these waters to get a sense of what's going on. It seems to me, and this is a speculative argument, it seems to me that by definition, artificial intelligence cannot be explainable. And the reason it cannot be explainable is because what artificial intelligence does, if I understand it correctly, is it produces knowledge through correspondence. By contrast, you and I, human beings, we produce knowledge through causal reasoning, right? We produce knowledge because it's cloudy outside, therefore it rains, right? So we see these kinds of patterns that are related as one leading to the other. Whereas, again, by contrast, what artificial intelligence does is it says, who cares what the reason is? Who cares why it is that people who are 6 feet 2 inches tall also like Bruce Willis movies? You don't need any causality, right? That's the strength of AI. It just goes straight to the conclusion. But if that's true, then we could never understand the way AI thinks, because it thinks fundamentally differently. Does that make sense?
It does. And to be honest, right, the field of explainability is still in its nascent stages. Yeah. I would definitely say that we haven't really cracked open, or even we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we can make AI systems explainable. The newer sophisticated technologies, especially deeper neural nets, are making it even tougher, right? I mean, the erstwhile traditional algorithms of using AI, using machine learning were a lot more explainable, a lot more easier to understand. The more newer ones are making it even tougher. The key thing that we focus on when we talk about explainability is, and we're making great strides there, eventually we'll hopefully be a lot more better in terms of understanding it. But it's also about, not just about understanding how it works, in terms of understanding why it made certain decisions, right? So it's okay for us to not understand why it came up with a decision. It would be great for us to still understand what were the few outcomes that it considered, and why did it select a specific one. We've been working with connected car systems, and we are now looking at when an autonomous driving car starts making certain decisions, what were the options available for this car to make a decision at that point in time, and why did it choose one versus the other? The understanding of why and what were the options is the first step in it. And I do strongly believe that, which is explainability, is one of the topmost reasons why AI is still got a long way to go before it can be adopted at scale in the way we've been seeing in the movies.
Right. So maybe there's an explainability available, but it's a different kind of explainability than we would be used to when we talk with human beings about why why did you order the pizza instead of the hamburger or something.
That's correct. I would definitely
so terrific. So that's, please. Yeah.
No, all I was saying is I would definitely keep the understandability and the teachability part of it along with explainability. It's a broader subject there.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Okay, so those are introductory thoughts from our panelists, and I know that you have an interest in integrating ethics and compliance. How does that work, that integration function within the kind of unique world which is artificial intelligence?
I would like to take it actually a step back, and not only, when you're talking about cross-functionality and ethics and compliance, that's not necessarily an AI and ethics question for me. It's more of a business ethics question, and it's applicable to all businesses, really all businesses and products and services. It really starts at the C-level commitment first, and leaders being models to the rest of the employees, and really walking the talk that they have, and in their actions, in their priorities. It is then also embedding the organization's values, principles into the practices and the incentive mechanisms within that. So if you're talking about a company that is focused on artificial intelligence, what is your product, what you incentivize within your company, and what you incentivize within your product and services, and how are those working together. It's also understanding ethics is not a constraint on your innovation or an extra expense item on your or a delay in your product, but that you can create a value and you can create a difference amongst your competitors, in the marketplace, by embedding the ethics and cross-functionality in your company, in your products. Just thinking about kind of flipping that, because whenever you start talking about ethics, it's like, okay, I don't have time for it. I need to hit the deadlines. That's expensive. That's extra toll. But it can actually be an opportunity to understand, early understanding of risks or opportunities, different markets, different ways of creating their stuff. But also embedding that whole cross-functionality and ethics piece into your management development schemes, your project management cycles, your full development and deployment cycles, policies and procedures, and creating those in such a way that people can come together and can freely talk about what they think, what their concerns are, what their ideas are, freely, rather than going through a whistleblower route. So I think for me, it's corporate ethics, it's business ethics, and it's applicable to all, but it certainly has a special place within the AI, and it is for the improvement of your services and your products.
Right. It seems like that's almost the holy grail, isn't it, of the AI ethics, is to try to find a way to present and use and employ these tools so that they add value as opposed to being a limitation on the engineers or a restraint upon the production of profit. So it seems to me that's very interesting. It seems to me that if you can make that claim reasonably and demonstrate some evidence for this, that the application of a structured ethical approach to artificial intelligence, or anything else for that matter, actually leads to financial benefits, then it seems like your job is going to be a lot easier to me. Do you have any examples of having done that, of having found a kind of ethical entrance which has allowed a company to see their product better or understand how it might work in the marketplace better or avoid a risk that could have occurred?
I do. I mean, I'm not going to name any names, not to endorse anyone, but yes, absolutely. I've seen a couple of companies actually that I'm in touch with that they are holding themselves accountable in the first place for what they do and what they put out there. Instead of going fast and okay, let's launch it and then reiterate later, and so we'll see where it's going to break, who's going to react to it. They're actually putting their product out there and opening it for third-party reviews, not going behind this trade secrets or IP routes, and they're putting them out there and saying, hey, we've done everything that we can possibly do. We've done this and this in terms of our governance and product cycle, but we know that there's things that we're not going to catch, and we don't want to put it out there and say sorry. We are asking for your help to see us where, the blind spots that we might have missed or different perspectives. So not only are they doing the cross-functionality and embedded ethics discussion inside the company, but they're opening that outside to the communities that might be impacted or some other experts that might have different ideas. And, doing that, they're also not trying to kill their competition. Yeah. I think that's pretty crucial as well. If you trust your product and if you trust your team, I think there's definitely a differentiation when you're trying to, instead of killing the competition, that you're trying to elevate the competition and elevate the discussions around that, then everything becomes a better product, a better service. And I've definitely seen examples of that in some of the companies.
Well, I can maybe just give you a very quick example that sort of flows in with the point you were making. I was working with a team that was doing an ethics evaluation of a medical device. And what this medical device did is it analyzed your heart, an electrocardiogram. So it was not invasive. You just took your heart electrocardiogram data, and it was able to find, of course, that's a perfect application for AI, because if you look at your heartbeat data, it's actually a wave with all kinds of little waves within it. But it's very difficult for the human eye to detect problems, especially when you have 1,000 heartbeats, right? But AI, through precise analysis and measurements of all of these parts of the wave, very effectively detects tiny anomalies in the heartbeat, and therefore can actually predict quite, with some power, can predict impending coronary disease and so on. So this company had this product, and they put it out. And one thing they didn't think of is that, well, if we signal that you might have an impending heart problem, you are going to change your life a lot, right? You're going to change your diet. You're going to stop doing exercise. Maybe, I mean, who knows what you're going to do. So on the one hand, they were selling their product saying, look, this is a quality of life product, which it is if it warns you of a heart attack before it comes. But on the other hand, because their output was so, the word is escaping me now, that specific versus sensitive, but in any case, because it was not sufficiently specific, that is, it caught too many false positives, you could actually make the case that this company, which was presumably helping people's lives, was hurting it, because so many people who had no real problem were going around anxious at night, not able to sleep, doing all kinds of unnecessary exercise and changing their diet and so on. So that's also sort of an example of a kind of a blind spot which a company can have. And we were able to locate that because one of our categories that we use to evaluate companies is autonomy. We say, look, does this product increase human autonomy, yes or no? And when you look carefully at that, then you can sort of pick up things like this heart problem, which is a problem within an idea, which is a terrific idea, right? So in any case, so that's a kind of adding on to this idea that I think that ethics of AI can have positive value, can add value, and not negate value.
And to your, if I can just quickly add to your example, why wouldn't you get those perspectives and improve your product instead of down the line you're creating anxiety in someone's life and someone had this heart attack because of the anxiety created, and then you're on the newspapers, on the headlines with a lawsuit against you. Why wouldn't you, not only from a ethical and responsible perspective, but from a legal perspective as well,
and a business perspective. Salim or Monark, any thoughts on the integrated ethics and compliance?
I can provide one additional point to what I have seen as a core tenet to how we engage with our customers, and that is the intent. I think it is extremely important for us to understand what is the intent for that company in terms of how they want to engage their customers, how they want to go to the market. I have to say that we take responsible AI extremely seriously, to an extent where we want to make sure that we are not being used to launder somebody else's reputation, right? And I think the core part of how you do that is to essentially start with the intent. And if you have the right intent, we have methods and techniques, and I know it's an ever-growing field, it's an ever-improving field, but we have ways to help them. We have ways and means. I have been very surprised and very pleasantly surprised by a city here in California, and they were introducing or announcing a biosciences forum. They were essentially inviting all the big biosciences companies, all the AI native, technology native startups to come and set up shop in this particular city. And as they made this announcement to invite these companies, one of the topic that they had included as a part of that forum was the use of technology responsibly. And I think it is such a brilliant idea, right? So the intent is, I think, just one important aspect to this.
And that's at the heart of what Salim is doing. And for you, Salim, what does good AI governance look like? What are you looking for when you're filtering your investment possibilities?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think number one, let's define what governance is. Governance is sort of the process of establishing a decision-making framework, assigning some KPIs or milestones that we hope to accomplish, and then assigning some accountability for those milestones across your organization. And I think that not only in our own work, but in the companies that we invest in and the companies that they sell to, I think the intent is to sort of apply that same framework to AI governance, and to use that as a way to kind of guide decision making. And so, the themes that pop up from a framework perspective, and we've touched on a few of these already in many companies, is the concept of explainability, is the concept of transparency, and is the concept of ethical alignment. How does a set of decisions match the business values of a company? It's very, very similar to what Merve was saying early on, which is AI ethics need to reflect business ethics in an organization. And so we find that many organizations are looking at those three themes: explainability, transparency, and ethical alignment, to kind of guide the way that they look at the rules that need to be developed and the accountability then that they need to set. From an accountability standpoint, lots of companies are first of all, this work and the impetus for this work is really led by the CEO, and I think it does need to be set from leadership to kind of make this a priority, make this conversation and this process a priority within an organization. It also touches on the work that the board does as they look at business risk. And often this conversation flows into audit committees that we see that are looking at this topic, front and foremost. It extends to, the work that a general counsel would look at to kind of define business risk. It would then also go into the world of the CFO who is looking at financial risk, and then would also flow into the world of a CIO or a chief data officer who is looking at both technical risk. And so I think companies that do this well, I think, really try and map out who should be accountable for which decisions, and what then is the data that we need to do to kind of move decisions forward. And then finally, in terms of figuring out what's measurable, I think that unless we're measuring something, we don't necessarily know whether a governance approach is working or not. And so I think we're still in the early stages of trying to figure out what are the things we should be measuring: the value of data, the cost of data. Should we be measuring outcomes and looking at themes like bias, and how do we measure that? Looking at security and auditability and just the technical risk. And so I think that it seems to me, and at least in the industries that we're in, that companies are still at the very early stages of having this discussion. They're trying to develop a framework to have this discussion and make sure that they're including all of the critical decision makers in the organization to have a fulsome discussion. And the biggest challenge we're seeing right now in companies that are having these discussions is when you look at the topics of explainability, transparency, and ethical alignment, you can very much have a technical lens to these themes, which sets you down one path of discussions, versus more of a business lens to these topics, which then takes you down another path of discussion. And I think organizations are still trying to mature themselves to try and figure out how should they be, what context should they be having these conversations in, and ultimately, what is the outcomes that they're trying to measure?
Do you have any conundrums in that area which are just seem almost impenetrable? For example, it seems to me in this question of accountability, one that I cannot get to the bottom of is, for example, a self-driving car that is learning from its own feedback, right? So the car may leave the factory with a certain program in place and drive around for a bit, but presumably it's learning from the feedback, and perhaps also from feedback which is learned while the driver is in control of his or her own car. So then if the car then, in a certain sense, the data becomes the code, right? That the car is teaching itself to drive. And then there's an accident. Who do we blame in a situation like that? It seems extraordinarily difficult for me to get to the bottom of where accountability would lie in a case like that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great case study. I think another one that we often see is, companies are really leveraging different sets of data to drive algorithms and model development. And often within companies, they have their own set of first-party data, and then they also are using third-party data to augment the decision cycle and make decisions and outcomes hopefully better. But you then run into the tricky conversation of, which are the third-party data sets should we be using? How were they sourced? Do the users know the intent of which that was collected and how it will be integrated into other decision sets? So that's another example of where the waters can get really murky, and you start to have very tricky conversations about how do we advance the company without having full knowledge of the context of some of these these topics.
Right. So it's sort of, and I guess in terms of space, so you don't know what's in front of you because you don't know what's going to happen, but you don't know what's behind you either because you don't know exactly where your data came from and what it's contaminated with or what it's shaped by. So, right, it's an extraordinarily difficult labyrinth in which you find yourself, I think. Monark, creating AI with the human and the non-tech functions within the loop. This is something you're interested in. Do you have any successes or any sort of case studies you could share on that subject with us?
Lot of. And I think this is essentially what we live and breathe as part of our daily jobs, right? So we've seen some tremendous successes with human plus AI coming over the last few years. I can talk about, and I'll talk about a few, right? But one is how we've been using IoTs, wearable devices for cruise liners, for entertainment parks and resorts to essentially do personalization for individuals. And as you can imagine, right, you're talking about wearables, you're talking about IoT devices that are sending real-time signals and sensors. You can very easily see how this can be a lot more creepy. And for us, it is extremely important to make sure that when we design this solution, we are making sure that we keep the customer privacy as a trade-off between how much personalization you can or cannot give this consumer. Similarly, when you are talking about, and I think Salim touched upon it, right? When you're talking about getting these third-party data signals, when you're combining it with first-party data signals, we've been seeing a lot of shift towards digital marketing because of all things that are going around us. There are lots of companies that are now moving from a planned communication from a marketing perspective to trigger-based and looking at live stage events, looking at geolocations, looking at pings that you get from your mobile phones and location-enabled mobile phones that you've kickstarted to start pushing out messages. These are all use cases of where privacy, data, security has to be upheld, right? And we do this as an ongoing basis. We've been talking to public services companies. We've been doing contact track and trace. You're talking about health data there. You're talking about actually track and trace locations and where people have been, where people will be, who they are meeting. This is all very successful cases of human plus AI coming together, but with responsibility, privacy, and making sure that everything is extremely transparent at the foundation of it.
Do you find, I have a couple children, so I'm sort of curious, do you find that younger people are more comfortable or less comfortable revealing their data to the world? They're more willing to trade data for services or personal data for convenience than maybe I would be. What do you have any sort of thoughts about how the value or the ethics of privacy might be actually shifting as people are younger or older?
I don't have any data points to prove it, but I have 2 kids, and I can tell you from experience that that's possibly true. We grew up in a world where we had a sense of privacy to our information. I don't know whether that was completely warranted versus not, but we had a sense of privacy. We knew that there was a bit of control over what we have. The younger generation just knows about, and they've born and brought up in this world of social media. They've born and brought up in this world where everything can be made viral over a few days, right? Or a few minutes, actually, right? And they are aware that there is this network of information that they're connected to. And the only way to actually get information to them is if they're ready to share it with the other world as well, right? It's a bi-directional communication channel. But this is where I'd like to bring back the conversation they had around privacy versus agency. Right, and that is, I think Merve touched upon this early in her introduction, which is, hey, I can tell you that I'm going to collect your data and use it for marketing. That's transparency, right? I'm letting you know point blank that I'm doing it. Is it good enough if I do not have agency and control over whether I want you to allow you to do it or not? Right, and that's the true thing about agency. What if I'm not comfortable? Yeah. Right. And unless we give that agency to the end consumer, we will keep running into this debate. Though I do believe from personal experience that I think the younger generation is a lot more open to sharing data.
Right. We can almost imagine a world where people just intentionally reveal everything, right? You could go all the way to the other extreme and say, well, if I'm going to get all of these benefits, if I'm going to get a healthcare alert before a heart attack, if I'm going to get Netflix to give me the movie I want before I even think about what it is I might want to watch tonight, and et cetera. Well, maybe it's worth it. Maybe privacy as a value is not as valuable as it used to be. I guess I'm not sure, but it seems to me one of the interesting things that's happening right now is that the question of what privacy is worth, it seems to me is open. It's not clear. And on that subject, what privacy is worth, one of the things that's happening in the world today is that there is a kind of at least we're told, that there is a kind of a techlash. That's a term that seems to be circulating. I wonder if each of you could define what you understand by that, what you understand that term to mean, and whether or not you believe that there is a kind of a techlash occurring today in the industry. Why don't we start with Salim?
Yeah, I mean, I think we encounter the term techlash in the context of our companies trying to hire talent, and the talent being very critical about the morals and values and ethics of a company, the purpose of their solution, and again, challenging the positive value that they can create in the world with this new technology. And so the topic is very top of mind for us, because what we find is that if these startup companies are not focused on a place where they are, creating positive impact, it makes it really, really tough to find, the best talent in the world who wants to be engaged, putting their time and effort into building a solution and working for a company that they can be proud of, that aligns with their own morals and values. And so for us, we see it play out, a lot from a talent perspective.
And Merve?
I would say that a thing is definitely developing, that's definitely expanding, but nowhere near to make any changes in the company's business models or revenue models. I think putting those inside the companies who are challenging this with the people, the civic society outside the companies who are challenging the same things together and creating synergies might be another way to go about it. And also, just very briefly, the whole do good branding. I think some of people inside or employees inside a company see their companies doing one or two good things in terms of the environment, in terms of the local communities, etc., and have extrapolate that to the whole of the company, where you might be providing stuff to intelligence services, to police, you might have military contracts, etc. For good or bad, I think that extrapolation of the good from one project to the whole of the company is also limiting the efforts, but it's certainly on the
horizon. Yeah. And Monark, from your perspective?
So from what I have been experiencing, from our perspective, techlash is not as much as outright critiquing the use of responsible AI, but treating this as an afterthought. We've been seeing that on most projects, people want to essentially keep focusing on actually doing the value generation, value creation, using the best algorithms, and they typically keep the responsible AI as a bit of an afterthought. We've seen the industries that have actually lapped it up a lot better than the others have been ones with heavy regulations. So financial services, healthcare, public services, they have been a bit more receptive to adoption because of the regulations and compliances that come along with it. But I'll leave you with one anecdote, which for me was a tipping point and an aha moment on why responsible AI was the key. I think this goes when somebody asked in a forum, why do cars have brakes? And it was a bit of a surprising question. You don't really think about it, but then there were a few questions. One person said, it is possibly compliance. You wouldn't be able to get a car on the road if there were no brakes to it. Some people said it is for allowing you to slow down and stop in case of emergencies. But I think the most interesting answer that came about was brakes allow you to speed up. Yeah. And think about it for a while, right? If you didn't have brakes, would you ever go at a 60 mile an hour, 70 mile an hour, 80 mile an hour speed on your car, right? Brakes allow you to be in control and still accelerate. And I think I consider responsible AI to be that brakes, the guardrails that keep you in control while you accelerate your organization's goals. Thank you, James.
Well, thank you. And thank you all. A very enlightening discussion. I can tell you that I've certainly enjoyed it. And I hope that all of our panelists and our viewers also have enjoyed and learned from our discussion. Thank you.